Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last keynote session, presentation of the day, which is about application of artificial intelligence in PPM. I'm so glad to introduce you to the speaker, Vijay Mohan. Vijay is Executive Vice President with RxDatascience, responsible for artificial intelligence, advisory, strategy, and platforms, and he's joining us all the way from the US. So, Vijay, the floor is yours. I'll let you uh, present.
Thank you, Mithun. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking time. Over the next 25 minutes or so, I'll almost take this like a storyline where kind of try to give you our perspectives on why AI machine learning is a critical aspect in project program portfolio management, and then why now, what's the benefit, what's the value, how do we go about doing such a journey. So I want to make it a little bit more business oriented. I'm not going to go deep into any algorithms or logics or models, but for you to be able to take away something back at the end of this 30 minutes in terms of if you need to discuss these as business cases with your leadership, something that you could be taking away, right? So we'll briefly talk about what the business imperatives are, and then a few aspects around the industry viewpoint, uh, how AI has evolved, why is it like, it's gaining a lot of traction now versus maybe 10 years back. And then in the context of PPM, project portfolio program management, how AI machine learning can really enable and expand the value PPM brings to the table. I'll also discuss a couple of real life use cases, and then if you decide to go about doing something like this, what could be an implementation approach. So this is a little bit more. I would like to bring some real business sense into this whole thing rather than trying to make it very theoretical. Martin, if you can just have the group, the first question from the polling, I think that would be good. We have 4 polling questions. Because of the time logistics, we might just collect the responses, and then at the end of the day, we would share, what the audience is looking at. So if you can bring up the first poll, which just talks about what tools currently, perhaps, people might be using today. We'll give a minute for the audience to look and respond. Okay, let's get into the discussions. So from an industry viewpoint and business imperative, as we all know, the biopharma medtech industry, it's undergoing a lot of revolution in terms of the approach for drug discovery, launching of new products, which actually has also accelerated in the last 12 months. There are very new, what we call new age therapeutic areas, be it like RNA-based gene therapy, CAR T, which all is making patient as the center of the universe, and it also is generating enormous sets of data. We are also seeing a lot of regulatory agencies, FDA, EMA, JPMA, other agencies, warming up to the concept of using technology as a key enabler, be it in the discovery phase, clinical trials, real world evidence, so on and so forth, where AI really is becoming a centerpiece of the whole thing. And the key thing now is we are collecting large amounts of data. The landscape is becoming very, very complex. Obviously, the kind of programs we manage now versus maybe 10 years back is changing significantly. And that is where this discussion would come into play, where how and why the importance of PPM as it is, but now putting AI on top of it, how this could drive the value. Yeah. So if you look at this, this is a common theme. We work across multiple small, big, very large life sciences companies. What we see is lots of data silos across the board. A lot of what we call low ROI on the data. People are generating data, they're buying data, they're collaborating, they're getting from partners, so on and so forth. But the real ROI is still a challenge. Now, it could also be introduced because of the complexities in managing the data, the capability gaps, because it's fast evolving, the supply-demand gap is very, very high. And then also kind of, getting the executive sponsorship, the trust from the business in terms of this is real, this can really help them solve a problem. Because ultimately, it's not about the technology, it's not about AI, it's ultimately about, can it solve a business challenge? Can it bring value to the organization? Can it address the top 3-5 agenda items of the CEO? That's kind of the context. And then why now? There are 3 fundamental things, shifts in the last few years. One is the exponential growth of data. They say every 18 months the data is growing 2x rate, but in reality, in the last 12 months, perhaps it has grown what it would have been in the last 5 to 10 years. Better algorithms, what they call the algorithmic world. It's moving a lot more towards 80% of algorithms are there. How could we now fit into the particular problems? And then the biggest thing is computational power. I'll share some examples in terms of the kind of things we are seeing in the drug discovery and why this is becoming a key element. So the combination of these 3 and the complexity or the innovation in the field of medicine is all becoming an ideal scenario where AI application is becoming more relevant. Also, from a computational power, compared to some of us who started in late 90s, some of maybe earlier than 90s as well, from the early days of client-server computing to cloud computing to serverless, where literally now we can analyze billions of data points on the cloud on demand, which was not a capability that was existing 5 years back, which means you have more capabilities now to process and analyze data, which is also a driving factor behind AI. Let's take a minute and define what AI is, because there are many different definitions. Some people think reporting is analytics is machine learning, right? So AI fundamentally is how could we replicate or mimic what a human brain does in efficient computers based on tasks. And it could be many different aspects. It could be natural language processing, machine learning, deep learning, robotics, sensors, IoT. You can see on the right side. These are all, in principle, a general definition of what the building blocks of AI is. And if you see the second paragraph there, data is really almost like the catalyst that helps these algorithms or models learn and function in terms of solving various mathematical problems. So this is kind of a simple definition of AI. In today's discussion, obviously, we'll not be able to touch on all the aspects. I'll be touching upon a few of them with some real life use cases in terms of how this is being applied in the field of PPM. Let's take an example here. I'm sure the left side chart, you have seen many variations of this in terms of the stages of the advanced analytics. In fact, now there's one more new stage called the new normal on top of dominance, because the world has completely changed in the last 12 months. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to shape. We are still in the transition stage. But if you fundamentally see, there are 4 different stages. The first 2 stages more on the reporting and analytics, where typically in the PPM world, establishing reports, KPIs, trying to analyze where the variations are, where the risks are, and so forth. But if you really look into the application of AI machine learning, it's really in the prediction and prescriptive, where not only you're producing your reports, managing portfolios, and kind of looking at the metrics, but you're starting to analyze why there are issues with the resource plan, for example. If you change a resource plan, what's the implication for the program? What's the implication of cost and budget? Where should you be prioritizing your resources, as an example? And the last and most important aspect is scenario planning. This has become fundamental. Some of us who have worked in supply chain operations, scenario planning was always very, very critical. This has become very critical forefront now, where because of what's happening now, because of the way the scenario would evolve in the upcoming months and years, you need to have the ability to consider multiple variables, internal, external, and do quickly scenario planning to see which programs should we focus on, what happens if some variable changes, what happens if a manufacturing plant in Asia shuts down, all these modeling aspects, right? In the center, you see there are various levers, key business drivers, which could be different for different companies. It could be innovation, a competitive advantage. It could be cost. It could be automation, efficiency gains, quality compliance, so on and so forth. Okay, so maybe we'll pause here. Martin, if you could bring up the second question on the polling, and we'll take a minute. Yeah, please. Okay, I guess we'll continue. So that should set the context in terms of what the business imperatives are, why AI now, and then what are the key elements of AI and where it fits into from an overall analytics maturity landscape. I'll share a couple of thoughts around some strategic frameworks, perhaps it could be applicable, useful. So these are all the key elements any organization, when they start looking at AI in general, but also in the context of PPM, you need to be looking at. Of course, you need to have a vision that aligns with the broader business priorities. Stakeholder engagement, sponsorship is a very key aspect. Of course, technology is always there, data science, data integration capabilities. Partnership model, we are seeing a lot where the industries are really collaborating with companies as well as universities, because in this space, it's very rare that companies completely do on their own, like in the past where they either had any other technology initiative. Partnership is becoming a very, very key aspect. Of course, the data privacy, security aspects. So these are all the key building blocks in terms of as you set up your strategy, what are the key elements from an overall framework. Now let's look into, in the context of PPM, what and how could an analytics capability could look like. So we could look at many dimensions, but I chose to put in like 4 key aspects here. So the first one focuses more around the research, development, and clinical. The second one focuses around more on the supply chain operations. And the third one here on the left focuses around the risk, outcomes, KPI, financial aspects. And then, of course, the baseline here is the data part and the data management. And I'm taking a slightly different view. Rather than focusing just on the project portfolio internal, almost focusing on what a PPM group, who their customers are. These are all the customers typically PPM group adheres or caters to. So in the first example, PPM, or in the context of analytics in the PPM, could be used for validation of targets and prioritization. This is a big question that is there, and we see a lot of companies still use combination of offline tools, Excels, human knowledge, if you will, in terms of, okay, there are portfolio of therapeutic areas and drugs. Where should they be putting their bets on? How do we make those decisions, if you will? Because as we all know, there is a lot of money, resource, risk involved, and making a decision here can have far-reaching implications. That's an example. Clinical trials outcome prediction is also an example where as the clinical trial progresses, how could we consider a variety of variables? Can we know earlier on, maybe at stage 1, whether the outcomes is going to be positive or not? That's an example. And then a lot of companies are also looking at managing the partner KPIs and outcomes, because there are a lot of CROs. How could we manage their portfolio of programs? How could we look at the KPIs, outcomes, and predict any failure points before even it happens? On the right side here, one example I would take is a lot of experiments happen in the chemistry where, hundreds and thousands of experiments happen before they perfect the recipes that ultimately get transferred from a pre-commercial to a commercial world. Keeping track of those experiments, keeping track and enabling them to the business in terms of analyzing the data and the results is a very complex activity. And that's one of the areas where portfolio management is definitely going to help from an analytics perspective. Then from a risk management outcomes and KPIs, as I mentioned, the scenario planning and what if is becoming a very key element where can we use data points, both internal and external, including what's out there in the social media. For example, there is a lot of collaboration tools in the project portfolio management. Can we use NLP techniques to mine the data from the collaboration text, contextual text, and then combine with the real metrics and see what's out there from a real world versus what's out from the things that are being reported. And then can we measure the resource capacity cost optimization aspects based off all this data we are gathering? So this is an example where advanced analytics would be very, very applicable. Again, as I mentioned, these are all the things which typically PPM as an organization, they would cater to their customers. And here was an example. We thought that would be very applicable to the industry. And I would like to show 4 examples. There are a lot of examples, but then I thought of bringing some real life perspectives. The first one is on the target identification and portfolio management, where, as I mentioned, drug discovery and development is a very complex activity. And then particularly here, now with the advent of data, I know one company where in the US where they are up for the FDA approval sometime this year. They have used purely AI machine learning. 90% of the early discovery research is enabled by the AI, where they're able to scan thousands of chemical components. They're able to scan what the indications are, what the commercial potential is, the competitive landscape is, and then trying to make the big bets in terms of which therapeutic area they need to be placing their bets on. And this is almost impossible if you go the traditional route. And then this is where the aspect of AI machine learning would come into play. There's an interesting concept called as knowledge graph, which basically, this is the way Google and Facebook, they use their algorithms when you type in queries to find out various related documents. This is a powerful concept where you can link entities, to, for example, proteins to disease, disease to adverse events, to patient population, to the commercial viability of the product, where you can link the entities, and then depending on the changes to the network graph, you can understand the implications. So this is one example which is big outcomes very early on in the stage. Whether the drug is going to be a success or a failure, you'll be able to identify and make the bets earlier on. This is one example. The second one is, in terms of the related one, is in the R&D space, a lot of compounds are screened, a lot of chemistry experiments are conducted, and ultimately you need to be able to have the knowledge base of portfolio of all the screenings, because when they are scanning the next chemical for the next disease area, you rather try to see what's out there versus trying to spend 3 to 6 months, because usually this ends up several months to a year. This is an example where building a knowledge management based engine, where it could be a cognitive question answer based model, where you're able to see what research has been done, what experiments has been conducted, what the outcome is, and then what are the implications or relation of the compounds to the particular disease or the therapeutic area we are looking into. The third one is on the medical affairs. Literally, this is becoming a key front now, especially because of the way the whole omni-channel marketing and the likes of them is evolving, where the MSL, medical affairs, medical science liaison, is really becoming the forefront in terms of the bridge between the kind of the research commercial and the HCPs and key opinion leaders and so forth. A lot of budgets are allocated for medical affairs. The key challenge here is, how do we forecast what kind of capacity we need in relation to the drugs that are being either launched or pre-launched? And then how do we kind of effectively measure the outcomes And in terms of, because usually this involves millions of dollars budgets, and then lots of time, months to years. How do we use some of the, AI predictive capabilities, which can bring in a lot of variables into the mix, and then come up with a model that can help better predict and forecast the capacity or the resource requirements of the medical MSL. This could be expanded to other areas, but this is a very key challenge the industry is facing, so thought of highlighting that. And the fourth one is more on the clinical side, where it goes without saying there's a lot of partnerships. There are many different kinds of business models. Some companies go until the early discovery, then they sell the rights to a bigger company. Some go until stage 2, then they partner with other companies. But irrespective, CROs are the heart and soul of most of the clinical aspects. The key here is, even now we see a lot of companies, they have this lot of semi-automated or manual approach in terms of how they track the metrics. Forget about like doing any kind of predictive or future analytics. Getting the metrics in time, real time, is itself a big challenge. But extending that a little bit beyond, can I start predicting, how soon we can close a trial? Are we going to run into budget issues? Is the clinical trial going to be successful based off either past or based off the knowledge that's out there from research papers and other things? Can we establish a control tower where we can visualize end-to-end metrics and do what-if scenario modeling and risk management? This is one more, almost like a immediate ROI kind of a use case, where we have seen like multiple companies, especially in the small and mid emerging biologics and biopharma space, where this becomes a very, very critical aspect. And in all cases, the data could be coming from internal sources, coming from external business partners. It could be coming from structured and unstructured data, which brings up to this very, very key aspect. I think the game-changing play here is, if we are able to take what we call as unstructured data. Unstructured data simply means, things which could be there out in research papers. We all do lots of different portfolio reports. Only some of them are in mathematical numbers, like status, budgets, and so forth. But many things are descriptive aspects which are in unstructured data. There's a lot of collaboration that happens within the PPM, where people are talking a lot in their various channels in terms of either what they're seeing, the trends from a project performance, or from customer feedbacks, or running out of any resource issues. If you're able to combine structured data, which most companies might have figured out, along with the unstructured data, that is where the game-changing aspects would come into play. And then these are some examples. What are the odds a program could fail? Will a clinical trial after phase 2 be successful? What happens if I change my resource allocation? If we change something, what's the competitive landscape? What's the implication of changing in clinical trial 1 into the commercial forecast, perhaps they might have looked into? And then what's the sentiment, which is a very, very key, because usually structured data is very hard. You don't get the sentiments. We have seen many places where what you see in the status of a PPM dashboard could be slightly different than what the sentiment is really there in the collaboration channel. So this is where I think the structured and structured data combining, along with this knowledge graphs, would become very, very key to visually understand what the implications are on some of these questions. Yeah. And a couple of quick strategy frameworks. Obviously, how do we go about doing this? There are many aspects. There's the analytics capabilities, data access governance, the technology aspects, cloud, on-premise, and so forth. Talent is a big element. Governance is also very, very key. And ultimately, the user experience part, in terms of many companies are looking at, self-service kind of a program where, they need to be able to type cognitive Q&A type, and system should be able to help them through all the aspects in terms of answering those questions which we discussed earlier. Okay. And the last part is the kind of the way we do this is very different than a traditional approach, where you implement large scale, either a PPM system, it could be an ERP system, or a CRM, very different. Usually this is more rapid and agile, where you get many ideas, you pilot those ideas. It could be any, these are just representative, it could be HR, finance, any of the enterprise areas. You have some value levers in terms of measuring, is it worth pursuing this particular use case? And then, of course, you go to an investment business case, build, implement, and scale up. Very, very important. It's a very different mindset compared to long drawn, lengthy programs. Usually, from our experience, from here to here, it's a 8 to 12 week cycle. And then from here to here, it could be, 3 to 6 months. And then from there, it could scale a lot. Proving the value is very, very critical before you decide to scale up. Let me pause there, and maybe Martin, we could bring up the remaining two questions, and I could then just take a second and draw some conclusions. Thank you, Martin. Again, just to recap, key takeaways, we learned a little bit in terms of the business imperatives, why AI now in terms of the data, computing power, and the algorithmic power. We also looked into some strategic frameworks in terms of how, if you decide to start a journey, what are the key building blocks from a strategy perspective. We looked into some of the potential use cases where AI machine learning can help from a project portfolio management, mostly focusing on PPM's customers, if you will. We looked into how we could combine structured and unstructured data. That's really the power of AI that can help answer many of the questions. And then the concept of knowledge graph, which really is a very key element that's really taking on in the industry. And then in terms of the mindset difference, in terms of how we go about taking these initiatives, more agile, proving the business value, then scaling up. With that, I would conclude my discussions. If there's any Q&A, we can answer them now, or I believe there's one more Q&A at the end of the session where all the speakers would be there. We could answer then as well. Mithun, hand it over to you.
Thank you, Vijay, for such a wonderful presentation. I really like the way you presented that operational reporting could be really moved to a more predictive and high value added predictive and prescriptive analytics. And I think that is really the way to go. I liked the 4 real life cases that you presented, the use cases. And I think the point that we should all remember is that combined structured data with unstructured data can be a game changer. And I think this is like really the next level, the level up for the PPM community. And I think I would like to have more feedback on professionals on how they are doing it and on experiences of getting this kind of mix combined reporting. With this, I do have 2 questions, so I think it would be good to just answer them straight away before moving to the next session. So first question comes from Richard Bainey. What evidence exists to show greater concordance between AI-based probability of success predictions and actual success rates versus expert-based POS predictions and actual success rates?
Yeah, very good question. So what we typically try to do is we try to almost apply the real world evidence philosophy when we do these AI-based approaches, where once we come up with the models and the outcomes, we also try to compare against what the real world, because people have been doing this in their sense, try to compare and contrast them, and then try to see where the value drivers could be. Sometimes the outcome could be the same, but the adapting AI might help us achieve the end game 5 times faster than what it would have taken in the normal sense. That's one way. The second part is ability to ingest large amounts of data, which would be very challenging from a human perspective. So that's the other part. But in typically, we try to combine and compare both the empirical results as well as the mathematical comparing against the real world to ensure outcomes still are same or better than what used to be in the traditional approach.
Thank you very much, Vijay. And we have one more question from Andreas Norlin. When is there too much artificial intelligence? Is there a risk, example, for that creativity in the organization will suffer?
Excellent. We actually at RxDatascience really we call it augmented intelligence, not so much artificial. We believe, at least in our generation, it's going to be hard to replace human intelligence. What AI is really going to do is it helps to feed the extra insights that improves the human cognitive decision making process. So it's not about AI versus human, it's more about AI augmenting the human decision process. And that is where these pilot programs are very, very critical to prove and confirm what the objectives are. Still, there are a lot of unknown things around the bias in the engines and how they operate and all those things. It's still people are learning that field. But within the boundaries of what we know, we believe AI is more of a augmented intelligence than a replacement to the human intelligence.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I think it's a wonderful response, and I really think that, that's a interesting way to put it. That the term you used, the augmented intelligence, I think it's really interesting, and I would like to know more about it. So I think without waiting more, we don't have any more questions, and we can move to the next session. So where I invite you to join us. So please join us at the Q&A session. So maybe Simona, you want to talk now?
Yeah, I just want to thank Vijay and all other speakers of today for bringing a wealth of information and experience to stage. I believe that it was very valuable for all the attendees, and I'm very excited that it all went smoothly throughout the day. So I just wanted to conclude this session with maybe just summarizing what worked well, what you learned, and then we can move to the session. I'm going to just mention that it's the post-session Q&A. That's the breakout room where you can go. And I ask all the speakers who are here and who would like to be on stage responding to the questions to share their audio and video over there. The rest can watch, but I would prefer if the speakers are the ones who are on the stage. So that's just the logistics part of that, but I'm going back to my question. Summary, maybe even you, Vijay, if you've seen any sessions, if there was anything that struck your awareness and that was very insightful. Or Mithun, the floor is yours, guys. So just, yeah, tell me.
I think it was a wonderful day. I mean, we had great sessions right from the morning. I really liked the session from Antonio, and actually I had already seen parts of it before, so it was really good to get such a detailed picture of the project economy. So really interesting presentation. I liked very much the presentation of Loic on the virtual reality. I think it struck. It's something very different, and also Vijay's presentation. I think it's a game changer if we can really simplify and move from data which is dead, which is not going to serve, to more predictive and futuristic data. So I mean, that should be the focus. Like my mentor Skip Archimedes says always, wherever focus goes, energy flows. So if you want the energy to flow to the right topics, you have to put in place the right kind of tools in place. So I think we can talk lots about it, but so many interesting ideas we got. I really like the points on digital leadership from Ulrike. I think we needed that. We are facing a real crisis in terms of leadership due to this post-COVID stage, and the forced digital work or work from home conditions. And I think it was a very good reminder of what we need to bring into our organizations. So with that, I think every speaker did a wonderful presentation. I learned so much from all of you, and I had so much fun, and I guess the audience members too. And let's continue and move on to the post session Q&A. And I also look forward to continuing the journey with you tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. Tomorrow we start at 9:30 with a case study. So make sure to tune in, and thank you for coming to day one. And we are looking forward to hosting you tomorrow as well. So see you in the sessions in the breakout rooms. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.